a little girl in a wheelchair, her small hands already raw and bleeding, forced by her elegant stepmother to scrub a heavy red dress. Each stroke of the cloth makes her wince in pain, yet the woman's cold voice cuts the air with no mercy. Beside her, a loyal German shepherd barks fiercely, placing himself between the child and the cruelty. And then, at the doorway, a father in uniform returns home early, his storm-gray eyes widening as he finally sees the truth he had missed for so long. Where in the world are you watching this from? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage and hope, and may your day be filled with peace and kindness. The autumn air in Elmwood, Massachusetts, carried a sharpness that hinted at winter's approach. The town's narrow streets were lined with elms already stripped bare, their skeletal branches rattling in the evening wind. The sky wore a dull gray cloak, and the last streaks of sunlight were swallowed by gathering clouds, leaving behind a world that smelled faintly of rain and smoke. Officer Ethan Hayes, 38 years old, steered his aging police SUV down Maple Street, his broad shoulders hunched with the weariness of a 12-hour shift. Ethan stood at a height just under 6'2", with a frame hardened by years on the force but softened at the edges by grief. His face, with its storm-gray eyes and dark stubble that seemed permanent these days, bore the lines of a man who had carried too many burdens alone. His wife Charlotte's death in a car accident had broken something inside him, and though he never spoke of it openly, the hollow look in his gaze revealed wounds far deeper than any uniformed badge could conceal. Beside him in the back seat lay Ranger, his 6-year-old German Shepherd K9 partner turned household guardian. Ranger's coat was a striking black and silver, thick and well-groomed, though scarred faintly across his flank from a training accident years ago. His amber eyes glowed with a mix of alertness and devotion, scanning the window as if guarding both his master and the night beyond. Unlike most dogs, Ranger had a calm, steady bearing, rarely barking without purpose, yet his presence carried an invisible weight of authority. To the officers at the station, he was a hero who had once tracked a missing child through miles of woodland. To Ethan's daughter, he was simply the quiet angel who sat faithfully at her side. Inside the Hayes household, 10-year-old Emma Hayes waited by the piano that faced the window. Emma had inherited her late mother's auburn hair, though now it was often tangled, falling in loose strands over her pale face. Her blue eyes were wide and expressive, reflecting both the innocence of childhood and the weariness of someone who had seen cruelty far too early. Emma's small body was confined to a wheelchair, her legs paralyzed from the accident that had taken Charlotte away. The chair itself was simple, its leather seat cracked at the edges, a silent reminder of both necessity and neglect. Emma's voice, soft but steady, carried a hidden resilience that fought to rise each time the world tried to silence her. Victoria Caldwell Hayes, Ethan's second wife and Emma's stepmother, moved through the house like a shadow of elegance. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slim, her figure accentuated by a taste for fashionable dresses that shimmered even in dim light. Her dark hair was sleekly combed, falling neatly against her back, and her hazel eyes could turn warm in public yet cold and sharp in private. To neighbors, Victoria appeared generous, hosting charity teas and smiling at everyone in church pews, but behind closed doors, her nature twisted. She had grown up in a household obsessed with appearances. Her mother, a socialite who valued perfection over compassion, her father, a man who gambled away affection as easily as he gambled money. These early scars had hardened Victoria into someone who wore charm like a mask and wielded cruelty like a weapon. That evening, as Ethan parked the SUV, Ranger leapt down gracefully, his paws crunching against the gravel. Ethan's tired steps followed as he entered the house, where the polished wooden floors reflected the dim light from the chandelier above. He kissed Victoria on the cheek in passing, too distracted by work calls on his phone to notice the faint narrowing of her eyes. "I'll be late again tomorrow," he murmured, shuffling toward the kitchen for coffee. Victoria's smile lingered for him, but it was empty, her gaze already shifting back toward Emma in the living room. Emma had been sitting quietly, her fingers tracing idle patterns over the piano keys. Once, her mother had played beside her, filling the house with laughter and melody. Now, each note felt like a ghost. "Don't sit idly," Victoria snapped, her voice low and cutting, once Ethan disappeared down the hall. "The laundry won't wash itself." Emma's hands trembled. "My hands? They hurt," she whispered, her voice quivering like a bird against glass. Her skin was red and raw from repeated scrubbing, faint cracks splitting at her fingertips. Ranger patted over, resting his large head gently on her lap, amber eyes fixed on her with silent concern. Emma stroked the top of his head with shaking hands, finding in him a comfort no one else gave her. Victoria's eyes narrowed at the dog, though she kept her distance, unwilling to test his protective instincts. She pointed sharply at the laundry basket by the corner, the red fabric of a dress spilling out like a wound. "No excuses. That dress needs to be cleaned before your father notices. Do it now." The weight of the order pressed down on Emma like a chain. She wheeled herself slowly toward the basin, Ranger following so close that his fur brushed the side of the chair. Her arms ached as she lifted the heavy fabric, dipping it into cold, soapy water. Each movement burned, the soap seeping into open cuts, and tears blurred her vision. She tried to swallow her sobs, for crying only earned harsher words. Victoria stood tall, her golden earrings catching the light as she crossed her arms, tapping her heel impatiently. Ethan, meanwhile, stood in the kitchen cradling a mug of coffee. His phone buzzed again with messages from the department. Another early meeting, another late night. He rubbed his temples, convincing himself that Victoria's reassurances were true, that Emma was cared for. Guilt gnawed at him quietly, but he drowned it in routine. Ranger, sensing Emma's distress, let out a low growl that carried through the house. Ethan paused, frowned, then shook his head. "Settle down, Ranger," he called absently, unaware of the truth unraveling only a few steps away. Emma's hands slipped, the red dress sliding back into the basin, soap bubbles rising with streaks of pink from her split skin. She clenched her jaw, whispering to herself, "I can do this," though her voice cracked. Ranger pressed his nose against her arm, a small whimper escaping him. She wished she could tell her father everything, wished he could see past Victoria's polished smile, but she feared the disappointment in his eyes if he doubted her. As the evening deepened, the first drops of rain pattered against the window. Outside, the lamps flickered to life along Maple Street, casting pale halos on the wet pavement. Inside, Emma struggled silently, her heart heavy with both pain and hope. She looked once more at Ranger, who refused to leave her side, his gaze unblinking and loyal. For Emma, he was the only one who truly listened. The following morning dawned over Elmwood, with a thin veil of mist that clung to the rooftops and blurred the outlines of the church steeple. The rain from the night before had left the streets slick and shining, reflecting the muted gold of the early sun. The town square stirred with life, as shopkeepers pulled up shutters and children with heavy backpacks trudged toward the school bus stop. Inside the Hayes household, however, the air carried a different weight. Ethan had already left for an early patrol, Ranger trotting dutifully at his side in the SUV, leaving Emma alone in the hands of her stepmother. Victoria Caldwell Hayes stood before a tall mirror in the master bedroom, fastening a pair of pearl earrings with a practiced hand. She was preparing for the annual Elmwood Charity Brunch, a gathering of the town's wealthiest and most respected residents. Her dress today was gold silk, cut elegantly at the waist to emphasize her figure, with a thin black belt that gleamed in the light. She applied lipstick slowly, her lips curving into the poised smile that the community admired. To neighbors, she was the embodiment of grace and benevolence, the woman who chaired school fundraisers and delivered speeches about kindness. Yet, as she turned away from the mirror, the warmth drained from her face, leaving only sharp lines of calculation. In the living room, Emma sat quietly in her wheelchair, hands still bandaged from the scrubbing of the night before. Her pale face was drawn, eyes heavy from lack of sleep. She watched Victoria sweep past her, perfume lingering like a cold veil. "I expect you to finish polishing the floor before I return," Victoria said briskly, not even glancing at her stepdaughter. Emma swallowed hard, nodding faintly, though her arms trembled at the thought of pushing a mop. Across the street, Mrs. Teresa Alvarez watched from her porch as Victoria's car glided away. Teresa was in her late 60s, short and slightly stooped, with graying black hair always tied into a bun at the nape of her neck. Her skin bore the warm olive tones of her Mexican heritage, and her dark eyes carried both kindness and suspicion. A retired nurse who had worked decades in the pediatric wing of Elmwood General Hospital, Teresa had a habit of noticing details others overlooked. She had once lost a young patient because of abuse that went undetected until it was too late, and that failure had carved a permanent line of vigilance into her heart. So, when she glimpsed Emma through the window, struggling with a mop too heavy for her small frame, Teresa's hands clenched into fists. Meanwhile, at the town's banquet hall, Victoria swept through the entrance like a queen entering her court. The hall was dressed in white linens and glittering chandeliers, filled with the chatter of Elmwood's elite. Victoria glided gracefully between tables, her laugh soft, her compliments sweet. People leaned in to listen to her words, charmed by her effortless poise, yet no one noticed the hard edge in her eyes when she excused herself to make a quick phone call. "Yes, Gregory," she whispered into her cell, her voice lower than her public tone. "He's still blind to it. Don't worry, I'll handle the girl." Her lips curved into a smile as she returned to the crowd, the mask back in place. Back at home, Emma's hands slipped repeatedly, the mop handle banging against the wooden floor. Ranger patted around her, circling with soft whines, his amber eyes filled with concern. Finally, he pressed his nose against the mop, as if to push it away. "I know," Emma whispered, tears welling up. "I don't want to, but she'll be angry." Ranger licked her bandaged hand gently, his rough tongue pulling a small laugh from her, despite the pain. For a brief moment, warmth filled the room, until the sound of footsteps at the porch startled them both. Mrs. Alvarez knocked firmly before Emma could wheel herself away. "It's just me, sweetheart," Teresa called, her voice carrying the gentle authority of someone used to calming frightened children. Emma hesitated, but finally opened the door. Teresa's gaze fell immediately on the girl's injured hands. "Dios mío," she murmured, kneeling slightly to meet Emma's eyes. "What happened here?" Emma shook her head quickly. I just get clumsy sometimes." Teresa frowned, recognizing the familiar deflection. She had seen it in too many young patients who feared speaking truth. At that moment, Ranger positioned himself between Emma and the doorway, tail stiff, body protective. Teresa smiled faintly at the dog, raising her palms to show no harm. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" she whispered, noting the intelligence in his amber eyes. Ranger relaxed slightly, but kept his body close to Emma's chair. Teresa decided not to press the girl yet. Instead, she handed over a small container of homemade chicken stew. "Eat this later," she said softly. "It'll help you get stronger." Emma managed a quiet thank you, and for a moment, her eyes lit with gratitude. Later that afternoon, Ethan returned home earlier than usual, his duty shift cut short due to weather alerts predicting heavy rain. He entered to find Emma asleep in her chair, Ranger curled protectively at her feet. His heart softened at the sight, but the faint stains on the floor caught his attention. Too clean, too freshly scrubbed. He bent down and gently touched Emma's bandaged hands as she stirred awake. "Pumpkin, what happened here?" he asked quietly. Emma looked into his tired gray eyes and forced a smile. "I wanted to help clean, Daddy." Ethan exhaled heavily, guilt gnawing at him again, but once more he convinced himself Victoria was managing things. "You don't have to," he whispered, kissing her forehead. That night, Victoria returned glowing with the compliments of her peers. She spun a tale for Ethan about how the town admired his dedication, how lucky she felt to stand by his side. Ethan, weary, nodded, grateful for any illusion of stability. Yet in the kitchen, while she sipped her wine, Victoria's eyes flicked to Emma with silent disdain. Emma shrank back into her chair, clutching Ranger's fur for courage. The German shepherd growled low, his amber eyes locked on Victoria, a warning unspoken but clear. Outside, Teresa Alvarez stood once more on her porch, watching the Hayes house cloaked in shadows. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and whispered into the night, "Not again. I won't let another child slip through unseen." Her resolve hardened. Tomorrow, she would start asking questions. The storm clouds thickened above Elmwood, and rain began to fall steadily, drumming against rooftops and sidewalks alike. Inside, Ethan slept heavily from exhaustion, unaware of the growing fracture in his household. Emma lay awake, staring at the ceiling, Ranger's steady breathing the only anchor keeping her from drifting into despair. She whispered into the darkness, One day, Daddy will see. One day he'll know. And Ranger, as if understanding, raised his head and pressed his muzzle softly against her arm. Rain lashed against the windows of Elmwood that evening, wind carrying the smell of wet earth and the distant hum of traffic along the main road. Inside the Hayes house, the polished floors reflected the flickering light of the lamps, creating shifting patterns that seemed to mirror the unease filling the rooms. Ethan Hayes returned earlier than expected, his gray eyes heavy with fatigue, yet alert enough to notice the atmosphere felt taut, like a string pulled too tight. Ranger padded beside him, fur damp from the drizzle outside, ears pricked and body tense as though sensing what his master could not yet see. Ethan removed his jacket and walked down the hall, intending only to pour himself coffee before catching up on unfinished paperwork. But before he reached the kitchen, the sound of a raised voice cut through the quiet. Victoria's sharp tone sliced through the air. "Do it again, you clumsy child. I want that dress spotless this time." Ethan froze, every muscle tightening. He edged closer until the kitchen doorway came into view. There, under the harsh yellow light, Emma sat in her wheelchair, leaning over a basin filled with soapy water. Her small hands trembled as she tried to scrub a heavy red dress. Her bandages had slipped off, exposing raw skin, red with irritation. Blood seeped from tiny splits in her fingertips, swirling into the white foam. Ranger's growl rumbled deep in his chest, low but unmistakable. He stepped forward, planting himself firmly between Emma and Victoria, his amber eyes burning. The German shepherd's thick black and silver coat bristled, every hair raised as though ready to lunge if necessary. Victoria, tall and slender in her fitted blue dress, spun around. Her hazel eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly masked it with disdain. "Control your animal, Ethan," she snapped, though her voice faltered slightly. "She's just lazy. I'm trying to teach her responsibility." Ethan's storm-gray gaze hardened as he took in the scene. His daughter's bleeding hands, the red dress half submerged, the sharpness in Victoria's voice. For a long moment, he said nothing, the silence louder than any shout. Then Emma's small voice broke through, weak and trembling. "Daddy, my hands hurt. I can't." Her body swayed, exhaustion overtaking her. With a soft whimper, she collapsed sideways, her wheelchair tipping precariously. Ethan surged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. He held her close, feeling how light and fragile she was, her breath shallow against his chest. His heart clenched as if a vice had wrapped around it. "Emma, I've got you," he whispered, his voice cracking. Ranger pressed against his leg, whining anxiously, eyes never leaving the girl. Victoria stepped back, crossing her arms. "She exaggerates. She always does this when she doesn't want to work. You can't let her manipulate you." But Ethan's fury erupted, his voice hoarse. "Enough. Don't speak another word." His gray eyes burned into her, and for the first time since their marriage, Victoria faltered, her poise slipping. Within minutes, Ethan carried Emma out into the rain, ignoring Victoria's protests. Ranger trotted alongside, tail low, but ears forward, a sentinel ready for any threat. The police SUV roared to life, its headlights cutting through sheets of water as Ethan sped toward Elmwood General Hospital. The hospital, a modest but bustling building on the edge of town, glowed warmly against the storm. Inside, the pediatric wing smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender air freshener. At the reception desk stood a young nurse named Clara Monroe, petite with curly brown hair pulled into a ponytail and freckles dotting her cheeks. Her soft voice and gentle demeanor often soothed anxious families, though behind her, calm eyes lingered the sadness of someone who had once lost a younger sibling to illness. Clara immediately rose when she saw Emma limp in Ethan's arms. "Follow me quickly, sir," she said, leading him to an examination room. There they were met by Dr. Margaret Collins, a woman in her early 50s with short silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. She was tall, with a lean build that carried an aura of authority. Years of treating children had carved both compassion and firmness into her character. Her sharp green eyes scanned Emma's condition in seconds. "Set her down carefully," she instructed. Ethan obeyed, laying Emma gently on the bed. Ranger sat at the foot, refusing to move. Dr. Collins examined Emma's hands with practiced care. "These are not accidents," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for doubt. "These are repeated injuries from chemical exposure and overuse. This child has been forced to do work her body is not capable of." She glanced up at Ethan, her eyes hard. "Mr. Hayes, your daughter is being abused." The words struck Ethan like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the edge of a chair for support. His mind raced, fragments of moments flashing, Ranger's restless barking at night, Emma's forced smiles, the too clean floors, the bandages. Guilt rose in his throat, bitter and choking. I didn't see it," he whispered, his hands clenched into fists. "God help me, I didn't see it." Clara stepped forward, gently placing a blanket over Emma's frail body. "She needs rest now," the nurse said softly. "We'll dress her wounds and monitor her. But she needs to be kept safe from whoever caused this." Ranger lowered his head onto his paws, amber eyes still locked on Emma, as if vowing silently to guard her through the night. Ethan sat in the hallway afterward, head in his hands, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside him. The sound of rain tapping against the window blended with the memory of Emma's weak voice, the sight of her hands bleeding. He whispered to himself, "Charlotte, I failed her. I failed your daughter." The name of his late wife broke from his lips like a prayer and a wound at once. Dr. Collins approached, clipboard in hand, her expression both stern and compassionate. "Officer Hayes," she said evenly, "if you want to protect your daughter, you need to act now. I can file an official report, but this will open a difficult road." Ethan looked up, gray eyes steel hard despite the pain. "Do it," he answered. "Do whatever it takes." The rain eased outside, though thunder still rolled faintly across the horizon. Ethan rose, glanced once more into the room where Emma slept peacefully under Ranger's watch, and felt resolve harden within him. For too long, he had chosen blindness for the sake of peace. Tonight, the glass had cracked, and there was no turning back. The storm that had battered Elmwood through the night gave way to a damp stillness the following morning. Clouds hung low and heavy over the rooftops, the air carrying the metallic scent of rain-soaked streets. In the Hayes home, silence lingered like an unwanted guest. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his uniform shirt wrinkled, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in his hands. His storm-gray eyes looked distant, weighed down by the memory of Emma's frail body in his arms the night before. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, amber eyes watchful, as though sensing the storm that now raged within Ethan's mind. Upstairs, Victoria Caldwell Hayes stood before her vanity mirror, brushing her sleek dark hair with slow strokes. Her hazel eyes, usually sharp and controlled, flickered with unease. She had not expected Ethan to return early, nor had she anticipated him carrying Emma out without a word. For a woman whose life revolved around appearances, losing control of the narrative felt intolerable. She straightened her posture, slipping into a fitted burgundy dress that highlighted her tall, lean frame. To the world, she would remain the refined, benevolent wife, but inside her chest, anger coiled like a serpent. By mid-morning, Victoria met with her younger brother Gregory Caldwell at a dimly lit cafe 2 blocks from Elmwood's courthouse. Gregory, in his early 40s, had a rough exterior softened only by his sister's company. He was stocky, with thinning blonde hair and a permanent scowl etched into his face. His hands bore the calluses of someone who had done hard labor in spurts between jail stints. Yet his demeanor revealed an opportunist who preferred shortcuts to honest work. Gregory had a history of small-time hustles and petty frauds that had earned him little more than a reputation as unreliable, but his loyalty to Victoria was unquestionable. He leaned back in his chair, tugging at the frayed collar of his leather jacket, and muttered, "So, he's starting to see through you?" Victoria's smile was thin, her painted lips curling into disdain. "He saw a moment, nothing more. He's blind with guilt, Gregory, and guilt can be twisted." Her fingers tapped the side of her coffee cup with measured rhythm. "But we must act now, before he turns that guilt into action." Across from them sat Monica Blair, a family lawyer in her late 30s with sharp cheekbones and chestnut hair pulled neatly into a bun. She wore a charcoal blazer and skirt, every line of her outfit calculated to project confidence. Monica had once been a promising attorney, but years of gambling debts and questionable decisions had tethered her to clients like Victoria, who could exploit her desperation. Her brown eyes, though keen, carried a faint nervous twitch whenever money was mentioned. "If he presses charges," Monica said in her cool, clipped voice, "the only chance is to discredit him. Make the court believe he was negligent, that Emma's injuries were from his absence, not your care." Gregory chuckled dryly. "And how do we do that? Everyone in this town loves him. He's Officer Hayes, the dependable widower. They pity him." Victoria leaned forward, her hazel eyes gleaming with calculation. Pity can turn into suspicion with the right whispers. If people believe Emma is troubled, prone to lies, prone to seeking attention, then his story collapses. We'll make him the negligent father, too consumed by work to see his own child's manipulations. She paused, smoothing the fabric of her burgundy sleeve. "I have played the perfect wife too long to lose now." While Victoria plotted, Ethan sat in Dr. Collins' office at the hospital. The pediatrician had invited him back for a follow-up meeting to discuss Emma's care. The office was warm, lined with children's drawings taped to the walls, bright rainbows, stick figures, and crooked houses drawn with crayon. Dr. Collins herself sat behind her desk, her short silver hair neat, glasses perched firmly on her nose. Her green eyes studied Ethan with the calm patience of someone accustomed to breaking hard truths gently. "Officer Hayes," she said, folding her hands atop a stack of files, "I want you to understand the seriousness of this. Emma's wounds are not minor. Continued stress on her hands could cause permanent damage, even impair her ability to play piano, which she clearly loves." Ethan's jaw tightened, the muscles twitching. "I should have seen it. I should have protected her sooner." His voice cracked under the weight of self-reproach. Dr. Collins leaned forward slightly, her tone softening. "Guilt will not help her, Mr. Hayes. Action will. You have a loyal companion in that dog of yours, and from what I saw, Emma draws strength from him. Let Ranger guard her, but let your choices guard her future." Later that afternoon, Ethan sat in his patrol car outside the schoolyard, watching children scatter as the final bell rang. He was not on duty here, but something about the ordinary scene tugged at him. The carefree laughter, the scuffed sneakers, the groups of friends running home. Emma had once been like that before the accident, before Charlotte's death. His late wife's memory surfaced, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, her laughter echoing in the kitchen as Emma toddled at her side. Ethan closed his eyes, whispering, "Charlotte, guide me now." That evening, back home, Ranger prowled the yard restlessly. His thick coat bristled as he caught the scent of someone lingering too close to the fence. Gregory Caldwell leaned in the shadows, a cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. He flicked the ash onto the damp ground, his narrow eyes scanning the windows before disappearing into the night. Ranger's growl echoed low across the lawn until Ethan called him back inside. Victoria returned home later, perfume trailing her like a banner, her smile practiced as always. She kissed Ethan's cheek, her hazel eyes searching his face for cracks. "You look tired," she said softly, pouring herself a glass of wine. But Ethan's silence was heavier than any argument. He sat beside Emma as she tinkered gently at the piano, Ranger lying close at her wheelchair. For a fleeting moment, the melody filled the room with warmth. Yet the shadows clung close, whispering of the battle yet to come. The sky above Elmwood turned a flat, unbroken gray on the morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps slick with drizzle that had fallen through the night. Crowds gathered outside, umbrellas dotting the square like black flowers, reporters pressing forward with cameras ready. For a small town, few events stirred such attention, but the story of Officer Ethan Hayes, his paralyzed daughter Emma, and the whispers of abuse inside a polished home had spread quickly, igniting public curiosity. Inside the courthouse, the main chamber buzzed with tension. Wooden pews were filled with townspeople, neighbors, and journalists. The judge's bench loomed high, its oak polished to a stern gleam. At the prosecution table sat Ethan, his frame upright though exhaustion shadowed his storm-gray eyes. He wore his Navy police uniform, polished yet simple, his badge catching the light. Beside him was attorney Samuel Harris, a seasoned lawyer in his 50s. Harris had a tall, lean build, salt and pepper hair neatly parted, and sharp blue eyes that revealed both intelligence and empathy. Known in Elmwood for his unwavering sense of justice, Harris had once taken on a wrongful termination case for a factory worker and won against a corporate giant, earning him both respect and enemies. His calm demeanor carried an undercurrent of steel, the kind of man who would not bend under pressure. On the opposite side sat Victoria Caldwell Hayes. She appeared the picture of grief-stricken dignity, dressed in a long black dress, her dark hair pulled into a smooth chignon. Her hazel eyes were reddened, makeup artfully smudged as though she had wept before entering. She clutched a handkerchief delicately, the perfect image of a woman maligned. At her side was Harold Bennett, a well-known defense attorney in his mid-50s. Bennett was barrel-chested, with a square jaw and thinning gray hair, his deep voice commanding attention. Ruthless in the courtroom, he was notorious for bending narratives until they nearly snapped, often winning cases not by truth, but by sheer aggression. The gavel struck, silencing the murmurs. Judge Eleanor Price presided, a woman in her early 60s with short silver curls and a no-nonsense expression. She was of medium height, her posture upright, her eyes dark and unflinching. Known for her fairness, Eleanor carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had navigated decades of difficult cases, never yielding to theatrics. "Court is in session," her firm voice rang out. Bennett rose first, his booming tone filling the room. He painted Ethan as a father consumed by work, absent for long stretches, leaving his fragile daughter in the care of a loving stepmother. He gestured toward Victoria, who dabbed her eyes delicately. "She has done everything for that child," Bennett declared, "and yet she is vilified because Officer Hayes refuses to accept his own neglect." Harris responded calmly, his voice even yet cutting. "This case is not about appearances. It is about truth, and the truth will speak through witnesses, evidence, and the scars borne by a 10-year-old girl." The first witness called was Mrs. Teresa Alvarez. She entered with quiet dignity, her gray-streaked bun tidy, her petite frame wrapped in a plain cardigan. Despite her age, her eyes burned with conviction. Taking the stand, she spoke clearly, her voice carrying through the chamber. "I saw the child through the window, scrubbing with hands already raw. I heard her cry. I recorded what I saw because I could not sleep at night otherwise." Harris played the video on a screen, Victoria's shrill voice berating Emma as the girl struggled to clean, her hands bleeding. A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Victoria's calm mask flickered for a moment before she quickly lowered her gaze. Dr. Margaret Collins followed, stepping into the witness box with the same steady authority she had shown in her office. Her silver hair glinted beneath the lights, her green eyes unwavering. These wounds were consistent with repeated forced labor, not clumsiness, not accident, she testified. This child has been subjected to harm at the hands of her caregiver. Her words cut sharply, leaving no room for interpretation. Inspector Angela Morris was next, a tall, lean woman in her 40s with light brown hair tied neatly back and steel-gray eyes that scanned the courtroom with practiced precision. In her crisp police uniform, she exuded both discipline and resolve. Known within the department as relentless in her investigations, Angela had earned her reputation years earlier after exposing a smuggling ring despite threats to her life. She opened a file and presented reports. We interviewed 8 neighbors. Each reported hearing yelling, crying, and in some cases witnessing the child forced into tasks beyond her ability. The accounts are consistent and credible. At the defense table, Bennett shifted uncomfortably. He pressed forward, calling Gregory Caldwell to the stand. Gregory shuffled nervously, his leather jacket replaced by an ill-fitting suit. His pale face glistened with sweat under the lights. I only tried to help my sister," he stammered, voice cracking. "She told me the girl exaggerated." "I didn't think it was serious," murmurs erupted in the gallery. Bennett tried to redirect, urging Gregory to portray Emma as manipulative. But before the questioning could continue, Victoria suddenly stood, her composure unraveling. Her hazel eyes flashed with fury, her voice rising into a shriek that silenced the room. "That useless child! She sits in a wheelchair, she drags us all down. I sacrificed my youth for her, and she gives me nothing but shame." The words spilled out, raw and venomous. Gasps filled the courtroom. Judge Price's gavel struck sharply. Victoria's outburst had shattered her image of refinement, leaving her exposed before all. Ethan rose slowly, his uniform steady, his presence calm, yet filled with quiet fire. He placed a hand on Emma's shoulder where she sat in her chair beside him, whispering softly, "You're safe now." Ranger, waiting patiently outside the chamber with another officer, barked once, the sound echoing faintly down the hall like an affirmation. Judge Price's stern gaze settled on the defense. "This court will not tolerate such displays, but it is clear," she said firmly, "that the truth is surfacing." The gavel came down again, signaling the end of testimony for the day. The storm outside had shifted into the courtroom, exposing what had been hidden. And for the first time, Ethan felt the tide turning in his favor. The next morning dawned with a hard brightness, the kind of pale sunlight that seemed to expose every crack and shadow. Outside Elmwood County Courthouse, the crowd was larger than the day before. Reporters jostled for position, microphones raised, while townspeople leaned against the iron railings, eager to glimpse the drama unfolding within. The drizzle had passed, but the ground remained damp, reflecting flashes of cameras. For Emma Hayes, being wheeled into the courthouse by her father, the attention felt suffocating. She lowered her gaze, her small hands clutching the arms of her chair. Beside them, Ranger walked with calm dignity, his thick black and silver fur gleaming under the morning light. He drew murmurs from the onlookers, many whispering about the loyal German shepherd that had never left the child's side. Inside, the chamber hummed with expectation. Judge Eleanor Price sat at her bench, her silver curls gleaming beneath the overhead lamps. Her dark eyes scanned the room, wary of the volatility she had witnessed the day before. At the defense table, Victoria Caldwell Hayes adjusted her black dress and smoothed her hair, her face painted with the pale sheen of someone feigning fragility. Her lawyer, Harold Bennett, leaned toward her, whispering strategy, though the tension in his jaw revealed concern. On the prosecution side, Ethan Hayes sat beside attorney Samuel Harris, his posture rigid, storm-gray eyes locked forward. Emma remained close, Ranger lying stretched beside her chair like a living shield. The proceedings began with Bennett attempting to salvage the defense. He painted Victoria's outburst as grief-driven, the words of a woman overwhelmed by stress. "She is not a monster," Bennett boomed, his deep voice echoing. "She is a woman burdened by responsibility, misunderstood in her devotion." But the jury's faces, ordinary townspeople with weathered lives and discerning eyes, remained unmoved. Harris rose, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you saw yesterday was not grief. It was truth, and today you will hear from witnesses who will confirm that truth beyond any doubt." The first called was Pastor Jonathan Reed, a man in his early 50s with a tall, lean frame and thinning sandy hair. He wore a simple navy suit, his round glasses perched low on his nose. Known for his compassion, Reed had served Elmwood's church for over 2 decades, often counseling troubled families. His voice was steady as he took the stand. "I visited the Hayes home several times," he testified. Each time, Emma seemed withdrawn, her hands bandaged, her spirit dimmed. When I asked Victoria, she claimed the girl was clumsy, but I saw bruises that no clumsiness could explain. I regret not speaking sooner. His admission brought a murmur of sympathy from the gallery. Next came Mrs. Alvarez again, producing photographs she had quietly taken from her porch, images of Emma struggling with chores beyond her ability. The gallery gasped as the photographs were projected, stark evidence of suffering. At the defense table, Victoria's composure began to fray. Her hazel eyes flicked nervously, her hands tightening on the handkerchief until the fabric tore slightly. Gregory, seated behind her, shifted uneasily, his broad frame hunched in guilt. He avoided his sister's glare, knowing his half-hearted testimony yesterday had done little to protect her. The tension reached its peak when Harris requested that Emma herself speak briefly, under the judge's close supervision. Judge Price hesitated, her stern eyes softening as she regarded the child. "Only if you are comfortable, young lady," she said gently. Emma swallowed hard but nodded. Ethan's hand squeezed her shoulder. Ranger pressed closer, his warm fur brushing against her arm. Emma's voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as she spoke. I tried to do what she asked, but my hands hurt. I wanted to tell my dad, but I was scared he wouldn't believe me. Ranger stayed with me. He never left me. Her eyes glistened, but she lifted her chin with quiet bravery. The room was silent, the weight of her words more powerful than any lawyer's argument. It was then Victoria snapped. Rising abruptly, she slammed her hands on the defense table, her voice shrill and cracking. She lies! She always lies! She wants to ruin me, to make me the villain. That child is nothing but a burden. I gave everything, and she gives me nothing. Her face twisted, the mask of elegance torn away, leaving raw fury exposed. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Judge Price struck her gavel sharply. "Order! Mrs. Hayes, sit down!" But Victoria continued, her voice breaking into hysterical shrieks. "You think she's innocent? She ruined my life! I won't let her!" Two bailiffs rushed forward, their dark uniforms crisp, their movements swift. One was Officer Carla Jennings, a broad-shouldered woman in her late 30s with a stern face and cropped auburn hair. Known for her no-nonsense efficiency, she grabbed Victoria's arm firmly. The other, Deputy Mark Hollis, a tall man with dark skin and a calm, steady demeanor, moved to support. Together, they restrained Victoria, her screams echoing until the door shut behind her. In the sudden silence, Ethan wrapped an arm protectively around Emma. Ranger rose to his feet, standing tall, his amber eyes fixed on the door, as though to ensure the threat was truly gone. Harris adjusted his papers with calm precision. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "the mask has shattered." The truth is, plain Judge Price's gaze swept the room, her voice measured but resolute. "This court will recess until tomorrow. The jury has witnessed enough for today." Her gavel struck once more. Outside, the crowd surged with renewed fervor. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But amidst the chaos, townspeople began murmuring their support. "That poor girl," one woman whispered, clutching her daughter's hand. "Thank God she has her father." The tide of public opinion had turned, and it flowed firmly toward Ethan and Emma. As they left the courthouse, Ethan lifted his daughter gently into the SUV. Ranger hopped in beside her, pressing close so she could bury her face in his fur. Ethan glanced back once at the courthouse, his jaw set, his storm-gray eyes hard with determination. The battle was not yet over, but Victoria's mask had shattered beyond repair. For the first time in years, he believed he might truly protect his child. The trial's noise and frenzy lingered in the air long after Victoria's breakdown, but Ethan Hayes knew he could not keep Emma in the house that carried too many shadows. Within a week, he found them a modest rental on the edge of Elmwood, a 2-story cottage with white siding, wide windows, and a sloping porch that overlooked a patch of overgrown grass. The house smelled faintly of cedar and rain, its rooms empty but filled with possibility. On the morning they moved in, the autumn sun cut through thinning clouds, scattering golden light across the dew-damp yard. Ranger bounded ahead, his black and silver coat gleaming, tail high, as though claiming the new space for his family. Ethan carried Emma inside, setting her wheelchair near the front window. She looked around with wide blue eyes, her small hands running over the wooden armrests as if to test the reality of this brighter place. "Is this really ours?" she asked softly. Ethan crouched to her level, his storm-gray eyes tired but softer now. "Ours," he promised. "No one will hurt you here." Ranger pressed his head against her arm, sealing the vow with a low, contented rumble. Neighbors soon appeared, curious about the new occupants. Among them was Sarah Whitfield, a woman in her late 40s with tall, willowy stature and sandy blonde hair that had begun to silver at the temples. She wore simple jeans and a flannel shirt, her weathered hands carrying a basket of muffins. Sarah's life had been marked by loss. Her husband, a firefighter, had died during a warehouse blaze 10 years earlier. Since then, she had raised 2 sons alone, developing a resilient kindness that drew her to anyone struggling. "Welcome," she said warmly, setting the basket on the counter. Her green eyes flicked to Emma with gentle concern. "If you need anything, don't hesitate. We look out for one another in this neighborhood, Ethan nodded his thanks, struck by her open sincerity. Days settled into a rhythm. Ethan rose early to brew coffee and cook simple meals. Scrambled eggs, toast, sometimes oatmeal with honey. He fed Ranger a hearty breakfast before driving to the station for shortened shifts, determined to balance duty with fatherhood. At home, Emma began to fill the silence with halting piano notes. The old upright piano, donated by Sarah after she learned of Emma's love for music, stood by the window where sunlight poured in. Its keys were worn, a few slightly yellowed, but when Emma pressed them, sound bloomed through the house like fresh air. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez arrived with a pot of chicken soup and a stern smile. "For strength," she told Emma, setting it down before patting Ranger's head. The German shepherd, now fully at ease in the cottage, wagged his tail before resuming his post at Emma's side. Teresa Alvarez, short and sturdy in her 60s, became a frequent visitor, often sitting with Emma while Ethan worked late. She told stories from her nursing years, sometimes funny, sometimes heavy, always ending with a lesson. Emma listened wide-eyed, fingers idly tapping piano keys as though weaving the tales into music. Ethan himself found solace in these evenings. He would return to find the kitchen warm, with the smell of food, Emma's laughter floating lightly through the halls. Ranger stretched protectively on the rug. For a man who had lived years with grief and guilt, the sight felt like a fragile miracle. One night, after putting Emma to bed, he stepped onto the porch and looked up at the stars. The autumn sky was crisp, dotted with constellations. "Charlotte," he whispered to the memory of his late wife, "I'm trying." She's safe now, Emma, for her part, began to grow bolder. With Ranger constantly near, she wheeled herself through the house with more confidence, exploring each corner. She started drawing again, filling sketchbooks with rough pictures of trees, dogs, and musical notes. One sketch, taped proudly above the piano, showed her sitting in her chair with Ranger by her side and Ethan standing tall behind them. When Ethan saw it, his throat tightened, though he said nothing, only kissing her forehead gently. The cottage became a place of gathering. Sarah often brought her sons, teenagers lanky and good-natured, who fixed the squeaky porch step and mowed the lawn without asking for pay. Mrs. Alvarez taught Emma how to make small clay ornaments, her old nurse's hands surprisingly deft with crafts. Ranger became a favorite of the neighborhood children, patient as they patted his fur, protective if anyone strayed too close to Emma's chair. Yet beneath the warmth, Ethan carried a quiet vigilance. He knew Victoria had been led away, but her shadow lingered. Some nights, when the wind rattled the shutters, he found himself pacing, checking locks twice. Ranger seemed to share his unease, occasionally growling softly at the darkness outside. Ethan reassured himself it was habit, but his hand often hovered near the badge and holster hanging by the door. Still, hope grew stronger than fear. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of rose and gold, Ethan sat at the table, spooning chicken stew into bowls. Emma, dressed in a soft blue sweater Sarah had knitted for her, pressed tentative chords on the piano. Ranger lay sprawled near her chair, his ears flicking at each note. "It doesn't sound right yet," Emma said, frustration wrinkling her brow. Ethan rose, standing behind her, resting his broad hand lightly on her shoulder. "It doesn't have to be perfect," he said softly. "It just has to be yours." She glanced up at him, then at Ranger, and smiled faintly. The melody grew steadier, filling the cottage with something that felt unshakably alive. By the time the first frost arrived on the lawn, the Hayes family had begun to stitch a new life together. The cottage, though modest, pulsed with light and sound, with neighbors who stopped by, not out of pity, but out of friendship, with a father who no longer turned away, and with a German shepherd whose loyalty stood like a wall between the girl and the shadows of her past. That night, as Emma drifted to sleep, Ranger curled close to her bed, his steady breathing a lullaby in itself. Ethan stood by the window, watching moonlight scatter across the yard. For the first time in years, he believed they had found not just safety, but a home. The first snow of winter arrived in Elmwood with quiet insistence, blanketing the cottage lawn in white and muffling the world in stillness. Emma sat by the piano in her blue sweater, her breath fogging faintly in the chill that crept through the window. She was practicing a melody she had written herself, her small hands pressing keys with care. Ranger lay stretched beside her chair, his black and silver fur stark against the pale rug, amber eyes following every movement, as though he too were listening for the right notes. Ethan Hayes watched from the kitchen table, sipping coffee and marking reports from his shortened patrol shifts. The house, once a place of silence, now pulsed with rhythm and hope. The letter came on a Friday afternoon, tucked into an envelope embossed with golden trim. Ethan found it in the mailbox as he returned from duty, snow crunching beneath his boots. The sender was a non-profit group called Voices of Tomorrow, an organization known for celebrating children who had faced hardship. The letter invited Emma to perform at a winter concert in New York City, hosted at Carnegie Hall, alongside other children living with disabilities. Ethan read the words twice, his breath catching. He entered the house, holding the envelope like a fragile gift. Emma's blue eyes widened as he read aloud. "Carnegie Hall," she whispered, almost afraid the words might vanish. She glanced at her scarred hands, then at Ranger, who wagged his tail softly. Ethan knelt, his storm-gray gaze steady. "You don't have to, sweetheart. But if you want to, we'll be with you every step of the way." Emma hesitated, then nodded, her lips curving into a small but determined smile. "I want to try." Preparations began at once. Sarah Whitfield, their neighbor, offered to help sew a dress suitable for the occasion. She worked with quiet focus, her tall frame bent over fabric at her dining table, sandy blonde hair falling loose from its bun. Having once tailored costumes for her son's school plays, Sarah now poured herself into creating something that would make Emma feel radiant. "Blue," she said firmly, holding up a swatch of soft satin. "The color of strength and calm. It'll bring out her eyes." Mrs. Teresa Alvarez visited often, bringing jars of honey tea to soothe Emma's throat after long practices. Her sturdy frame bustled around the kitchen, fussing over meals, while her warm brown eyes always lingered on Emma with protective affection. Ranger sat dutifully at Emma's side through every rehearsal, occasionally nudging her elbow when she faltered, as though reminding her not to give up. The day of departure, Ethan packed the SUV carefully, blankets and snacks neatly stowed. Ranger leapt into the back, tail swishing. Emma, bundled in a new winter coat Sarah had found at a thrift shop, clutched her sheet music tightly. The drive to New York stretched long, highways lined with snow-covered pines, city lights, eventually rising like a constellation on Earth. Emma pressed her forehead to the window, awe filling her gaze as skyscrapers pierced the winter sky. Carnegie Hall itself glowed like a cathedral of music, golden light spilling across its grand facade. Inside, velvet seats stretched wide, chandeliers glittered overhead, and the faint hum of tuning instruments filled the air. Children from across the country wheeled in or walked nervously with canes, each carrying stories written on their bodies and spirits. Among them was a boy named Daniel Foster, 12 years old, thin with dark curly hair, and a prosthetic leg that glinted under the stage lights. He introduced himself shyly to Emma backstage. "I play violin," he said, his brown eyes bright with determination. Emma returned his smile, and for the first time, she felt less alone. When her turn came, the hall fell into hushed silence. Ethan wheeled her gently to the center of the stage, his broad hand steady on her shoulder. Ranger, allowed by special permission, walked to the edge of the stage and lay down, his amber eyes fixed on her like twin beacons. The vastness of the hall pressed against Emma's chest, but then she heard Ethan's voice low beside her ear. "Play as if you're at home. Let the music speak for you." Her fingers touched the keys, trembling at first, then steadying as the melody unfolded. It was the song she had written in the cottage, a piece woven from both pain and healing. Each note carried the echo of nights spent in shadows and mornings of new light. The audience listened, breath held, as the small girl in the wheelchair filled the hall with sound that seemed larger than her body. Midway through, she glanced at Ranger, who lifted his head slightly, and she smiled. Her hands found courage in the loyal gaze of her companion. When the final chord lingered in the air, silence stretched for a heartbeat, then thunderous applause erupted. The hall stood as one, the ovation rolling like a wave. Emma bowed her head, cheeks flushed, eyes shining not with fear, but with confidence. Ethan's eyes burned with unshed tears. Sarah clapped from the balcony, her tall frame bent forward with pride. Teresa Alvarez dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, whispering, "Bravo, Nina." Backstage, reporters and organizers crowded, eager to meet the girl, whose music had silenced and then moved an entire hall. Emma accepted their words shyly, her hands gripping the arms of her chair. Daniel Foster patted her shoulder with a grin. "You were amazing. I want to play with you again someday." She laughed softly, the sound lighter than Ethan had heard in years. That evening, in a quiet hotel room overlooking the snowy city, Ethan tucked Emma into bed. Ranger curled close at her side, eyes half-lidded but watchful. Emma whispered into the dark, "Daddy, when I played, I felt like Mom was with me." Ethan leaned down, his storm-gray eyes wet, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "She was," he said softly. "She's always with you." Outside, snowflakes drifted past the glowing skyline. Inside, in the quiet of their small room, a father, a daughter, and a loyal German shepherd carried with them the knowledge that courage had turned into light, and light into hope. Winter thawed slowly in Elmwood, the snow on rooftops melting into rivulets that trickled down gutters and pooled in the cracks of the street. By March, the first shoots of green pierced through the cold soil around the Hayes cottage, fragile but determined, like Emma herself. Life in the new home had found rhythm. The days unfolded in a quiet balance of work, school lessons, therapy, and music, woven together by the presence of a father who no longer turned away, a daughter who had found her courage, and a German shepherd whose devotion was constant. Each morning, Ethan Hayes rose before dawn, brewing coffee in the small kitchen, while Ranger padded after him, nails clicking against the wooden floor. The officer's broad shoulders no longer hunched with the weight of guilt. Though still weary, his storm-gray eyes had softened. After preparing breakfast, he wheeled Emma to the table, where she would chatter about her new piano exercises or show sketches she had been working on. Ranger sat loyally between them, amber eyes shifting from one to the other, as if guarding the fragile joy that had taken root in their lives. Emma's piano playing had grown richer since the Carnegie Hall concert. Music teachers from Voices of Tomorrow sent her sheet music by mail, and sometimes she practiced duets over video calls with Daniel Foster, the boy violinist she had befriended in New York. Daniel's resilience inspired her. He often joked about racing her wheelchair with his prosthetic leg, his laughter filling the calls with warmth. Their friendship gave Emma a sense of belonging she had once thought impossible. The neighborhood also drew closer around the Hayes family. Sarah Whitfield, the tall, willowy neighbor with sandy blonde hair, visited weekly, bringing casseroles or spending long evenings knitting beside the fireplace. She often brought her sons, who repaired the squeaky back gate and built a ramp so Emma could wheel more easily into the garden. Their kindness, rooted in Sarah's own history of loss, wove the Hayes family into the community's fabric. Sarah herself carried a quiet strength born of surviving grief, and her gentle presence often eased Ethan's burden. Mrs. Teresa Alvarez remained a steady figure as well. The retired nurse, sturdy and practical, with her graying bun and sharp brown eyes, checked Emma's hands often, ensuring the scars healed properly. She scolded Ethan when he forgot to rest or skipped meals, her maternal fussing a comfort more than an intrusion. In her, Ethan found a reminder that compassion could outlast pain. One weekend, Sarah suggested organizing a neighborhood gathering to celebrate Emma's return from New York. The idea blossomed into a small block party held on the cottage lawn, with picnic tables laden with food, children running through the grass, and laughter spilling into the crisp air. Emma, dressed in her blue satin dress, performed a short piece on the piano Sarah had helped restore, her notes ringing out across the yard. Ranger lay at her side, tail sweeping the ground lazily. Neighbors clapped and cheered, their faces lit with pride. For Emma, it was not Carnegie Hall, but something more intimate, more profound, the embrace of home. Amid the celebration, Ethan stood quietly by the porch, speaking with Officer Carla Jennings, the auburn-haired bailiff who had once restrained Victoria at the courthouse. Carla, broad-shouldered and firm, admitted she had kept watch over the family even after the trial. "You did right, Hayes," she said gruffly, her steel blue eyes meeting his. "It takes more courage to stand for family than to stand on duty." Ethan nodded, his chest swelling with gratitude. As spring deepened, the cottage bloomed into life. Sarah's sons planted flowers by the porch, while Mrs. Alvarez taught Emma to grow herbs in small clay pots. Ranger took to lying in the garden, his thick black and silver coat shimmering under the sun, ears twitching at the sound of birds. Emma often wheeled herself outside to sit beside him, sketchbook in her lap, capturing him in clumsy but earnest drawings. "You're my hero," she whispered into his fur. Ranger's tail thumped once, as if in reply. Despite the peace, memories sometimes haunted the nights. Ethan occasionally woke in a cold sweat, Charlotte's voice echoing in dreams, or Victoria's shrill words rising again in his ears. On those nights he would step quietly into Emma's room, where she slept peacefully with Ranger curled at her feet. Watching them, he felt the shadows recede. He would whisper, "I won't fail you again," before returning to bed. By summer, Emma's strength had grown. Though her legs remained paralyzed, her hands were strong enough to attempt longer, more complex pieces on the piano. Her music filled the cottage at dawn and dusk, the melodies weaving into the rhythms of daily life. Ethan sometimes sat silently, eyes closed, as her notes transported him back to memories of Charlotte, her auburn hair catching sunlight, her laughter blending with Emma's giggles. Yet the ache no longer hollowed him. It reminded him of love that had not ended, only transformed. One evening in late August, after a long day of patrol and chores, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The sky stretched wide and clear, stars glittering across the velvet dark. Emma's laughter drifted from inside as she practiced a duet over video call with Daniel. Ranger padded out, sitting close, his amber eyes reflecting the starlight. Ethan rubbed the dog's thick fur and whispered into the night, "She didn't just survive, Charlotte. She shines inside," Emma called out. "Dad, come listen to me play." Ethan chuckled, rising to his feet. He walked back into the cottage where music spilled from the piano, Emma's face glowing with confidence. Ranger sprawled loyally at her side. For the first time in many years, Ethan felt whole, not because the past had been erased, but because love had rebuilt what cruelty had tried to shatter. The Hayes family story no longer belonged to shadows, but to light. And in that quiet miracle, beneath the watchful gaze of a loyal German shepherd, they discovered the simple truth. Home was not a place, but the courage to stand together and the grace to begin again. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, God's light can break through. Just as Emma found healing and courage through love, we too can discover the quiet miracles of God in our everyday lives. In a kind word, in a loyal friend, in the strength to face another day. If you believe in these miracles, share this story so others may be touched as well. Leave a comment below and tell us where you are watching from. And if your heart was moved, type Amen to let the world know you believe in God's grace. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of hope, and may the Lord bless you and your family with peace and protection.